The first frost came quietly, like a thief in the night, turning the stubble fields to glass. I woke to find the world transformed, every blade of grass encased in crystal, every breath visible in the gray dawn. From the timber-framed cottages below, thin threads of smoke rose straight into the still air, the only movement in a landscape holding its breath. This is November, in the year of our Lord 1275, and winter is no longer a distant promise but a presence at the door. The villagers have felt it too. I see it in the way they move, purposeful and quick, gathering what remains to be gathered, securing what must be secured. There is an ancient knowing in their bodies, a memory older than words. They do not speak of the cold to come. They simply prepare for it, as their fathers did, and their fathers before them. The season of endurance has begun. If you long to travel through lost centuries, stay with me. Our journey is just beginning. I arrived in this village 3 days past when the sky still held that peculiar brightness that comes before the gray settles in for months. The road from the market town had been rutted and hard, the mud of autumn finally surrendering to the first freezes of the season. Hawthorn hedges lined my path, their berries blood red against bare branches, and in the distance I could see the village clustered around its stone church like chicks beneath a hen's wing. The landscape here is one of gentle rises and shallow valleys, the remnants of the harvest lying in neat rows across the common fields. The barley and rye have long since been cut, their stubble now silvered with frost each morning. Beyond the fields, the forest stands dark and watchful, oak and ash mostly, their leaves carpeting the ground in copper and gold, though these colors too are fading into the universal brown of winter's approach. As I descended into the village proper, the smell struck me first. Wood smoke, yes, but also the earthy richness of turf burning in the poorer cottages, mixed with the tang of animals kept close to human habitation. Chickens scratched in yards despite the cold, their keepers having scattered the last of the grain chaff for them. I passed a woman carrying a heavy sack of something, turnips perhaps, or parsnips drawn from the cold earth before it froze solid. She glanced at me with neither welcome nor hostility, merely acknowledgement. Strangers are rare here as winter approaches. Most travelers have already found their destinations, settled into whatever shelter will sustain them through the dark months. To be on the road now marks one as either foolish or desperate, though in truth I am neither, merely curious, drawn by an inexplicable need to witness how life persists in these small clusters of humanity when the world turns cold and hard. The village itself numbers perhaps 40 households, their cottages built of timber frames filled with wattle and daub, the walls patched and repatched over years until the original construction is merely a suggestion beneath layers of mud and straw. The roofs are thatched with reeds or wheat straw, and I notice that many have been recently repaired, fresh golden thatch gleaming where old darkened material has been replaced. This is not decoration but necessity. A leaking roof in winter means misery, illness, perhaps death. In the spaces between cottages, I observe the final preparations. Wood piles stand higher than a man's head, the logs split and stacked with care to allow air to circulate while keeping the worst of the wet weather out. Some families have draped old sacking over their piles, weighted with stones. Near one dwelling, a man works steadily with an axe, splitting logs while daylight remains. He does not pause in his rhythm as I pass, though his son, a boy of perhaps 10 winters, watches me with frank curiosity until his father's voice calls him back to gathering the split wood. There is a feeling here, palpable as the cold itself, of turning inward. The village is closing like a flower at dusk, drawing its resources close, pulling tight against what is to come. The common well in the village center sees a steady stream of visitors, women and children mostly, drawing water while they still can, before ice makes the work twice as hard. They speak in low voices, their words lost to me, but their tone familiar. The quiet sharing of information, of concern, of community preparing to endure together what cannot be endured alone. I have found lodging in the house of a widow who keeps a room for the occasional traveler, though she made it clear such occasions are rare this time of year. Her cottage smells of onions and old smoke, and a thin cat watches me from its place near the central hearth with eyes that miss nothing. The widow, she tells me her name is Marjorie, asks few questions, but observes everything. She has buried 2 husbands and raised 5 children in this place, and winter holds no mysteries for her, only the familiar challenge of surviving it one more time. As darkness falls early, barely past the hour of none, I sit near her fire and watch the light fade from the single small window. Outside, I hear the sounds of the village settling into night, chickens being shut into their coops, the bleat of a goat, a mother calling her children inside. The temperature drops rapidly once the sun disappears, and I pull my cloak tighter, grateful for the fire's warmth. This is how it begins then. Not with drama or fanfare, but with this quiet drawing in, this ancient dance of preparation and resignation. Winter is coming, and these people know its steps by heart. Morning comes late and reluctant, the sun a pale disk behind layers of gray. I wake to hear Marjorie already moving about, building up the fire from the embers she carefully banked the night before. No fire is ever allowed to die completely in winter. The labor of rekindling from flint and steel is too precious, the warmth too essential to risk losing. I step outside into air so cold it burns in my lungs. My breath clouds before me, and the mud in the lane has frozen into deep ruts that will make walking treacherous. Already people are abroad, and I begin to see the texture of their winter routines unfold. A woman emerges from a cottage near the church, a basket balanced on her hip. As I draw closer, I see it contains roots, carrots, parsnips, turnips still clotted with earth. She is taking them to the storage pit, I realize, one of several dug deep into the ground and lined with straw where vegetables can be kept from freezing. She works with efficient movements, her hands red with cold even in their wool wrappings. When she notices my gaze, she nods once, a gesture neither friendly nor hostile, simply acknowledging one human to another in the shared experience of November's bite. Further along, I encounter a group of men working on a roof. 2 perch precariously on the thatch while a third hands up bundles of reeds from below. Their breath rises in clouds as they work, and occasionally one pauses to blow on his fingers before continuing. This is urgent labor. Every cottage must be sound before the worst weather arrives. A roof that seems adequate in autumn can prove deadly when snow accumulates or ice-laden winds tear at weakened spots. The sounds of the morning are particular to this season. The ring of metal on metal from the smithy, where tools are being repaired while there is still time. The rhythmic thunk of an axe biting into wood. The low conversation of women at the well, their voices carrying in the cold air. A child's cough from inside one of the cottages, a sound that makes the nearby adults exchange glances weighted with unspoken concern. Winter illnesses are no small matter here. They can sweep through a village, taking the very young and the very old with grim regularity. I walk toward the edge of the village where the animal pens cluster. The smell here is strong. Pigs rooting in their enclosure, chickens murmuring in their coop, a few geese honking territorially as I approach. But I notice something else. The animals are being kept closer than they would be in summer. The pig pen, which would normally be at a greater distance from the cottages, has been reinforced with additional fencing near the buildings. The chickens have had their coop expanded with a covered run. Even the geese, aggressive and loud, are contained in a space near enough to the cottages that their alarm calls would wake the households if anything threatened them in the night. An old man tends to the pigs, throwing them what looks like kitchen scraps mixed with a bit of grain. The pigs squeal and jostle, their breath steaming in the cold. The man notices me watching and straightens, one hand pressing against his lower back. "They'll not see spring, these ones," he says, his voice rough as tree bark. "Too costly to feed through winter. We'll slaughter before the nativity feast." I nod, understanding the calculation. Every mouth to feed is weighed against the stores that must last until the first greens of spring. Animals that can be preserved as meat serve the village better than living creatures consuming precious fodder. Near the church, a woman sits on a stool outside her cottage despite the cold, her fingers working steadily at a spindle. Wool, I realize. The fleece already carded into cloudy rolls now being spun into thread. She does not look up from her work, but her daughter, a girl of perhaps 12, glances at me shyly from the doorway where she is doing similar work. Winter is when such tasks intensify. The long, dark evenings must be filled with productive labor, and wool must be spun and woven while hands are still nimble enough to manage the work. I watch a boy leading a small flock of sheep from one field to another, their gray backs moving like water over the frozen ground. The sheep will be kept closer now, on the fields nearest the village where they can be watched and where the manor's shepherd can protect them from wolves that grow bold when hunger drives them down from the wooded hills. The boy carries a staff and moves with the casual competence of one who has done this work since he could walk. Throughout the morning, I observe the quiet choreography of preparation. No one moves with panic or haste, yet neither is there idleness. Each person has their tasks, honed by generations of knowledge about what must be done and when. A woman carries a heavy clay pot of something toward the communal oven, perhaps a stew of dried beans and salt pork that will feed her family for days. Another beats the dust from woolen blankets, airing them in the cold before they will be needed in earnest. The children I see are fewer than in summer, kept closer to home and set to useful tasks. A small boy carries armfuls of kindling to his mother. A girl sits carefully plucking the last of the late herbs from a small garden plot, her fingers moving quickly to gather what remains before frost kills it entirely. And everywhere the smoke rises. From every cottage, thin streams that speak of carefully tended fires, of warmth hoarded and protected. The smell of burning wood is the village's constant companion now, a scent that will not fade until spring returns. These are not my people, yet I feel something kindred in their movements, in the set of their shoulders against the cold. They are preparing for a siege, though the enemy is not human but the season itself, advancing with the inevitability of time, unstoppable and indifferent to human need. As the days pass, I begin to understand the rhythm that governs life here when winter tightens its grip. Time itself changes character, no longer measured by the sun's long arc across the sky, but by the brief interval between late dawn and early dusk, a window of light that shrinks with each passing day. The mornings begin in darkness. I wake to hear Marjorie stirring the fire, adding precious fuel to bring warmth back to the cottage. There is no question of lying abed once consciousness returns. The cold is too bitter, and there is work that daylight demands. The first task is always water. Before the well freezes solid, it must be drawn while drawing is still possible. I have watched women break the thin ice that forms overnight on the well's surface, their buckets descending into darkness and returning heavy with water that will be used sparingly throughout the day. Food dominates thought and conversation in ways I had not anticipated. In the market towns, even in winter, there is variety for those with coin. Here, the village lives on what it has preserved, and those stores must last until the first greens push through the soil in late March or April. I have learned to recognize the smell of each household's cooking. The turnip-heavy stew from one cottage, the barley pottage thick with whatever vegetables remain from another, the occasional fortunate household where the scent of salt pork enriches the air. Marjorie shows me her stores with a pride that is also anxiety. In the dark corner of the cottage, sacks of grain lean against the wall, barley mostly, some oats, a precious small amount of wheat for feast days. In clay pots sealed with fat, she has preserved butter from the autumn abundance. Hanging from the rafters, strings of onions and garlic compete for space with bundles of dried herbs, thyme, sage, the last of the summer's bounty transformed into insurance against winter's scarcity. The bacon will last till Candlemas if we're careful, she tells me, indicating the salted meat wrapped in cloth and hanging in the coolest part of the cottage. And there's the salt cod for fast days. Her face shows the calculation I have seen on every adult countenance here. The mental arithmetic of survival, counting mouths against supplies, weeks against stores. The preservation of food is both art and science here, passed from mother to daughter, father to son. I watch a woman packing cabbage into a barrel, layering it with salt in proportions she has learned by observation and repetition. Another household has root vegetables stored in pits dug below the frost line, each layer separated by straw. Every method has its purpose, its advantages and risks. Too little salt and meat spoils, too much and it becomes inedible. Vegetables stored too wet will rot, too dry and they shrivel to nothing. Animals receive care that reflects their value. The chickens are let out for a few hours each day when the weather permits, scratching for any remaining seeds or insects, but they are shut in well before dusk. I have learned that foxes grow desperate in winter, and a hungry fox can devastate a small flock in a single night. The pigs, already marked for slaughter, receive the least attention, though even they are given shelter from the worst of the weather. But it is the few cattle and the draft oxen that receive the most anxious care. These animals represent wealth, labor, future survival. They must be kept alive through the winter when there is no fresh grass, when hay must be rationed and supplemented with whatever else can be found. I watch a farmer feeding his 2 oxen carefully measured amounts of hay, mixing in straw and the chaff from the threshed grain. The animals are thinner than they were in autumn, but they are alive, and that is what matters. The manor shepherd keeps the village flock on the fallow fields, where they can still find some forage among the stubble. But I notice he brings them close to the village each evening, penning them in enclosures where they can be guarded. The threat of wolves is real. I have heard them myself in the night, their howls drifting down from the forested hills, a sound that makes the dogs bark and the villagers stir uneasily in their sleep. The working day is compressed by the lack of light. Tasks that can only be done outdoors must be completed in the brief window between dawn and dusk. I watch men repairing fences with numb fingers, women drawing water and washing what must be washed while daylight lasts. But as soon as the sun begins its descent, the village draws inward. The evenings are when the true texture of winter life reveals itself. Families gather close to their fires, the only source of warmth and light. Marjorie's cottage, like all the others, has no separate rooms. We live, eat, sleep, and work in this single space. The fire in the center is our sun, and we orbit it like planets, drawing close for warmth, moving back when smoke becomes too thick or heat too intense. This is when the women spin, their fingers working in the firelight, creating thread from wool with movements so practiced they need not watch their hands. This is when tools are mended, nets repaired, baskets woven from withies gathered in the autumn. This is when stories are told, though I understand little of the local dialect, tales of other winters, of strange occurrences, of ancestors and their deeds. Food in the evening is simple, often pottage reheated from morning, a thick mixture of grains and vegetables that serves as both food and drink. Bread, when there is bread, is dark and heavy, more barley than wheat. Sometimes there is cheese, hard and sharp, cut into careful portions. Ale appears more often than water, safer to drink, nutritious, and one of the few comforts remaining. I notice how little is wasted. Bones are boiled and reboiled until they yield no more nutrition. Vegetable scraps go to the pigs or chickens. Fat is saved for 100 purposes: cooking, preservation, making rushlights that give the poorest households their only light besides the fire. Even the ashes from the fire are swept carefully into a corner, to be used later for making lye. Sleep comes early, dictated by darkness and the cost of light. Families huddle together under whatever covers they possess. Wool blankets mostly, sheepskins for the fortunate straw-filled pallets on the earth floor. Body heat shared is body heat conserved. Privacy is a luxury no one can afford in winter, and through it all, the cold presses against the walls, seeps through every gap, turns breath to frost on the inside of shuttered windows. The fire fights it back, creating a small sphere of warmth and light. But beyond that circle, the darkness and cold wait, patient and inexorable. This is the reality of winter here. Not a season to be enjoyed, but an enemy to be endured, day by day, week by week, until the world tilts once more toward the sun. On the 5th evening of my stay, when the wind howls around the eaves and Marjorie has barred the door against the night's bitter teeth, she tells me of the winter that is still spoken of in hushed tones. The winter of 1258, 17 years past, when the world turned white and did not thaw for months. I was newly married then, she says, her face half in shadow as the firelight flickers. Living in my husband's father's house, 3 families under one roof. The snow came before Martinmas and did not melt until after Lady Day, drifts higher than a man could reach in the cold. She pauses, searching for words. The cold was a living thing, a beast with teeth. She tells me how families burned everything burnable, furniture, tool handles, even the wooden bowls they ate from. How the weakest died first, the very old, the very young, those already touched by illness. How a woman 3 cottages over gave birth in February, and the child froze before it could draw its first breath, the midwife's hands too numb to warm it. The wolves came into the village itself, Marjorie continues, her voice dropping lower. We heard them scratching at the doors. John Fletcher lost 2 sheep that were penned not 20 paces from his dwelling. Found them in the morning, just bones and blood in the snow. Her words conjure images that settle in my mind like frost patterns on glass. I think of this village, this same collection of cottages transformed into a prison of white, the paths between houses becoming impassable canyons, the church bell silent because no one could reach it to ring, the isolation, each family alone with their dwindling supplies and growing desperation. Did anyone starve? I ask, though I fear I know the answer. Old Thomas the Reeve died, she says after a moment, though some said he gave his portions to his grandchildren and told everyone he was eating. We'll never know the truth of it. And the Miller family, they lost 2 of their 4 children. Lung fever, the priest said, though empty bellies make every sickness worse. The next day I seek out the oldest inhabitants drawn by a need to understand winter's past. I find Edmund, a man of perhaps 70 years, sunning himself against the south wall of the church during the brief hour when winter's sun provides more light than warmth. His face is a map of lines and weather, and his hands shake with palsy, but his memory is sharp. "I, the great winter," he says when I mention 1258. But there have been others. When I was a boy, there was a year when the Thames froze solid. My uncle walked across it in London, said you could hold a fair on the ice. And my grandfather told of a winter when no spring came at all, just more cold. And the harvest failed, and people ate bark from the trees. He tells me of signs the old folk watch for, the thickness of the acorns, the behavior of birds, the way moss grows on the north side of trees. The squirrels knew this winter would be hard, he says. Been gathering nuts since August, more frantic than usual. And the geese flew south early, didn't linger like they sometimes do. As I walk back through the village, I notice things I had not seen before. On several cottages, symbols are scratched into the doorposts. Crosses, yes, but also other marks whose meaning I cannot decipher. Protection, perhaps, against the cold or the dark things that the cold brings with it. A woman I have not spoken with before stops me, her eyes bright with the need to tell. "You've heard about the winter of 58, I'll wager. But have you heard about what walks abroad when the snow is deep?" She leans closer and I smell the onions on her breath, the wood smoke in her clothes. There are things that love the cold, they say. Old things from before the church came. My grandmother saw one once, a woman pale as ice walking through the drifts without leaving footprints. She was singing, my grandmother said, a song in no language of men. I do not know what to make of such tales, but I see that she believes them, and that her belief is its own kind of truth. In winter, when darkness comes early and stays late, when the world is reduced to firelight and cold, the boundary between the real and the imagined grows thin. That night, listening to the wind scream around the cottage, I think about accumulated wisdom and collective memory. These people have survived winter after winter for generations uncounted. They know its dangers not as abstractions but as lived experience, as scars on the family tree where branches were pruned by cold and hunger and disease. The winter of 1258 is a marker, a measure against which all other winters are judged. Not as bad as the Great Winter, they say, or worse than any since the Great Winter. It has become legend, but legend built on the foundation of real suffering, real loss, real endurance. And I begin to understand that winter here is not merely a season, but a test, repeated annually, that separates the strong from the weak, the prepared from the foolish, the fortunate from the doomed. It is teacher and killer both. And these villagers are its students, learning and relearning the same harsh lessons with each passing year. The stories persist not as entertainment, but as instruction. Remember the winter of '58. Remember what happens when preparations are inadequate. Remember that the cold shows no mercy, that nature does not care about human plans or hopes or needs. Remember and prepare, and hope it will be enough. Outside, something howls in the darkness. Dog or wolf, I cannot tell. Marjorie stirs the fire, adding another precious log. We do not speak, but I feel the weight of all those winters pressing down on this moment. This cottage, these two people sitting before a small fire while the great cold world waits beyond the walls. The church stands at the village's heart, its stone walls rising from the frozen earth like a promise carved in rock. While the cottages huddle low, built of timber and mud and hope, the church reaches upward, its tower visible from every approach to the village. It is the only building here that will outlast the people who built it, the only structure that speaks of permanence in a world of mud and thatch and inevitable decay. I approach it on a morning when frost has painted every surface with delicate ferns of ice, when my breath hangs white in the air and the ground rings hard beneath my feet. The path to the church door is worn smooth by centuries of feet. Baptisms and weddings and funerals, the whole procession of human life channeled through this single entrance. The door is oak, massive and iron-bound, and it swings open with a groan that echoes in the stone interior. Inside, the cold is different. Not the biting wind of outside, but a deep, settled chill that seems to emanate from the very walls. The stone floor radiates cold through the soles of my boots, and I can see my breath clouding in the dim light that filters through small windows set high in the walls. This is a Norman church, built perhaps a century and a half ago, when the world was being remade in stone. The rounded arches speak of that era, as do the thick pillars that support the roof. But there are older elements too. I notice a font that seems to predate the current building, its stone worn smooth by holy water and innumerable christenings. Some say there was a church here in Saxon times, perhaps even before, a holy place marked out by instincts older than doctrine. The space is not large, perhaps 50 feet in length, 20 wide. But after the cramped darkness of the cottages, it feels vast. The roof soars above, timber beams blackened by centuries of candle smoke and incense. In the rafters, I can see where birds have nested, their presence tolerated or perhaps not even noticed. The walls bear the marks of faith and hope. There are faded paintings, images of saints and biblical scenes rendered in ochre and red and blue, though time and damp have turned many of them into ghostly suggestions. Here, I think I see Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child across a river. There, the martyrdom of a saint whose identity has been lost to flaking pigment and water damage. But the church's true purpose in winter becomes clear as I observe the comings and goings of the villagers. A woman enters, crossing herself at the threshold, moving straight to a side altar where a few candles burn before an image of the Virgin. She kneels, her lips moving in silent prayer, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles show white. What does she pray for? Health for her children? That the food will last? That spring will come again? All of these perhaps, and more besides. An old man sits in one of the rear benches, simply sitting, his gnarled hands resting on his knees. The church is warmer than his cottage, I realize, warmed by the massive stone that holds the earth's heat better than timber and mud ever could. He is not here for prayer, or not only for prayer, but for simple relief from the cold that makes his joints ache and his chest tighten. Father Benedict, the village priest, tends the altar with movements made smooth by repetition. He is a thin man, scholarly looking despite the rough wool of his robe, and his Latin, when he chants the offices, carries the accent of somewhere far from here. He notices me but does not approach, respecting perhaps the privacy of whatever has brought a stranger into this space. The church calendar governs village life in winter as surely as the sun governed it in summer. The Mass is said daily, though in winter the congregation is often sparse. Those who can spare the time, those who need the comfort, those for whom the routine is as necessary as bread. But on Sundays the church fills, the villagers packed together on the benches and standing along the walls, their combined breath creating clouds in the cold air. I attend Mass on Sunday, standing among them, and I feel the way the ritual binds them together. They speak the responses in unison, cross themselves as one, kneel and rise in synchronized movement. For this hour, they are not individual families struggling separately against winter's siege, but a single body, united in petition and praise. The sermon is brief. Father Benedict is practical enough to know that people must return to their work, their animals, their fires. But his words carry weight. He speaks of patience, of endurance, of trusting in divine providence even when the belly is empty and the cold seems endless. He reminds them that our Lord himself was born in winter, in cold and poverty, that suffering can be a pathway to grace. The bell tower draws my attention. The bell rope hangs inside the church, and at intervals throughout the day, it is pulled, sending sound across the frozen fields. The bell marks time, the hours of prayer, the calls to Mass, the warning of danger if danger should come. In summer, its voice is cheerful, celebratory. In winter, it sounds different, more somber, more necessary, a reminder that life persists even when the world seems dead. I climb the narrow stone stairs to the bell chamber, my hands running along walls worn smooth by countless ascents. From the tower, I can see the entire village spread below, the cottages with their smoking chimneys, the fields stretching away in shades of brown and gray, the forest dark on the horizon. The wind-up here is fierce and I do not linger, but I understand something of what this building means. It is an anchor. While everything else is temporary, crops planted and harvested, animals born and slaughtered, people living and dying, the church remains. It was here before any person now living was born, and it will be here after they are all gone. In the face of winter's assault, in the face of time itself, it stands, immovable and enduring. That night I lie awake in Marjorie's cottage listening to the wind and thinking about stone and faith. The church offers no warmth for the body, provides no food, cannot stop the winter from coming or make it leave before its time. Yet it offers something else, a framework for making sense of suffering, a community of shared belief, a physical manifestation of hope that something exists beyond the immediate, beyond the struggle to survive one more day. The people here are not particularly pious by the standards of monks or scholars. Their Christianity is mixed with older beliefs, older practices. They fear the cold and what it might bring with a fear that has roots deeper than doctrine. But the church is theirs and they are its, and in winter especially, that bond is tested and proven strong. I think of the old woman praying before the Virgin, and the old man simply sitting in the relative warmth, and all the feet that have worn the path to the door smooth, and all the voices that have risen in prayer within these walls. Winter is a crucible, burning away everything but what is essential. And for these people in this place, the church is essential, not for grand theological reasons, but for the simple, profound reason that it helps them endure. Night comes like a betrayal in December, arriving earlier each day, stealing the light before work can be finished, before water can be drawn, before the last necessary task can be completed. By the hour of Vespers, darkness is absolute, and the village becomes an archipelago of small lights. Firelight glimpsed through cracks in shutters, the occasional rush lamp or tallow candle burning in windows, each point of illumination marking a household's defiant warmth against the vast indifference of the cold. I walk the village paths after dark, wrapped in my cloak, my breath crystallizing in the air before me. The moon is nearly full, hanging pale in a clear sky, and its light on the frost-covered ground creates a landscape of silver and shadow. The frozen mud crunches beneath my feet, each step audible in the profound quiet. The sounds of night are sparse but distinct. From within the cottages I hear the murmur of voices, though I cannot make out words. A baby cries, the sound thin and plaintive, quickly muffled. A dog barks once, twice, then falls silent, perhaps warned by its master to quiet. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls, its voice like a question posed to the darkness. I pass the smithy, cold and dark now, its forge banked until morning. The smell of iron and char still lingers. Next to it, the bakehouse shows a faint glow. Someone has left embers burning. perhaps planning to bake bread at first light when the oven will be at the right heat. Every bit of warmth must be used, nothing wasted. As I walk, I become aware of the layered silences. There is the immediate silence of the frozen ground, the still air, the sleeping village. But beneath that lies another silence, the absence of all the sounds that fill the summer nights. No insects chirring, no frogs calling from the pond, no rustle of leaves in the wind. The world has been stripped to its essentials, and part of that essentiality is this profound quiet. I stop near the church and simply stand, listening. My ears begin to attune to subtler sounds, the creak of timber as frost works into wood, the distant crack of a branch breaking under the weight of ice. From the forest, a sound that might be wind or might be something moving through the bare trees. Then I hear it, the sound that makes the hair on my neck rise. A howl, distant but clear, rising and falling in a cadence that is unmistakably wolf. It is answered by another and another, a chorus from the hills. The village dogs begin barking then, a frantic defensive sound, and I hear shutters being drawn more tightly closed, the scrape of bars being set across doors. The wolves do not come into the village this night, but their voices remind everyone that the boundary between civilization and wilderness is thinner in winter, that hunger drives even the wildest things closer to human habitation. I think of the sheep in their pens, the chickens in their coops, and I understand the vigilance required to keep them safe. I return to Marjorie's cottage, easing the door open and barring it behind me. She looks up from her spinning, the firelight catching the angles of her face. "The wolves are hungry," she says. It is not a question. "Yes," I reply, moving closer to the fire to warm my hands. "They'll grow bolder before winter ends. They always do." We sit in companionable silence then, the only sounds the pop and hiss of the fire and the rhythmic whir of her spindle. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. I can feel it in the way the cold seeps through the walls, the way the drafts find every gap and crevice. Sleep comes fitfully that night. I lie on my pallet near the fire, covered with my cloak and a wool blanket Marjorie has lent me, and I drift in and out of consciousness. In the depths of the night, I wake to hear sounds from the cottage next to ours. A man's voice raised, not in anger, but in distress, and a woman's voice trying to soothe. An illness, perhaps, or simply the grinding misery of cold and hunger expressing itself in restless sleep. I wake again to hear rain beginning, a soft patter at first, then harder. Rain in December is worse than snow, Marjorie has told me. Snow insulates, can be managed. Rain soaks through everything, turns the ground to freezing mud, makes misery complete. I listen to it drumming on the thatch above, and I wonder if the roof will hold, if the repairs made in autumn were adequate. Toward dawn, the rain turns to sleet, tiny pellets of ice rattling against the shutters. Marjorie is already awake, building up the fire, her movements practiced and efficient. She does not speak, and neither do I. There is nothing to say. This is winter in its essence, endurance without complaint, survival as its own reward. As the first gray light begins to seep around the edges of the shutters, I hear the church bell ring for lauds, Father Benedict faithful to his office despite the weather. The sound carries across the village, a reminder of order, of routine, of something larger than individual suffering. Other sounds begin to emerge as the village wakes. A door opening, someone hurrying to the well before the ice grows too thick. The bleat of a goat, the clucking of chickens reluctantly emerging into the cold morning. The rhythmic sound of wood being chopped, a sound that will continue throughout the day, every day until spring. The sound of survival, one log at a time. I think about the night I have just endured. Not even a particularly harsh night by the standards of this place, yet still a small trial, and I multiply it by all the nights of winter, by all the cottages in the village, by all the villages across this land and beyond. How many people at this very moment are waking to cold and damp and hunger? How many are tending fires, rationing food, praying for spring? The scale of it overwhelms me for a moment. The vast, quiet suffering that winter demands, the patient endurance that is required not for days or weeks but for months. And yet life persists. In these cottages, people wake and tend their fires and face another day. They do not surrender, do not despair, though they have every reason to do both. They simply continue, because continuing is what humans do, what we have always done, through every winter the world has ever known. The pig must die today. I see it in the way the men gather after the morning mass, in the serious expressions and the measuring glances toward the pig pen. The animal has grown as fat as winter feeding allows, and any day now the cold will become so intense that butchering will be nearly impossible. Better to do it now, while hands can still hold knives steadily, while blood will still flow rather than freezing in the veins. I am invited to witness, not as a guest but as another pair of hands, another body to help with the heavy work. This is how community functions here. Everyone participates in the essential tasks, and butchering a pig in winter is as essential as any task can be. The pig seems to sense something, growing agitated as several men approach its pen. It squeals and tries to avoid them, its small eyes showing whites, but there is no escape. Strong hands seize it, and despite its struggles and cries, it is brought out and held down on the frozen ground. The killing is quick. Edmund, the old man I spoke with before, wields the knife with a steadiness that belies his shaking hands at other times. A swift cut to the throat, and the pig's cries turn to choking sounds, then silence. Blood pours onto the ground, steaming in the cold air, and women rush forward with bowls and baskets to catch it. Nothing will be wasted. The blood will become black pudding, mixed with fat and oats and spices, a food that will help sustain them through the coming weeks. What follows is a ritual I have never witnessed in such detail, a demonstration of knowledge accumulated over countless generations. The pig is lifted onto a table, really just boards laid across sawhorses, and the work begins in earnest. First, the bristles must be removed. Boiling water is poured over the hide, and men scrape with knives and sharp stones until the skin is smooth. The smell is particular, not entirely pleasant but not offensive either. The smell of transformation, of an animal becoming food. Then comes the opening of the carcass, and here I see the precision of practiced hands. The belly is slit from throat to tail, and the internal organs are removed with care. The women receive them, sorting and evaluating. The liver goes into one basket. This will be eaten fresh, tonight or tomorrow, a rare delicacy. The intestines go into another, to be cleaned meticulously and used as casings for sausages. The heart, the kidneys, the lungs. Each organ has its use, its destination. A woman I have not spoken with before, Agnes, I learn her name is, explains as she works, her hands moving constantly even as she talks. The fat is precious, she says, showing me the layers of it being carefully cut away. We'll render it down for lard, cook with it, preserve meat in it, use it for light when we have no other. Her face is intent, focused, but there is satisfaction there too, the satisfaction of work that matters. The butchering continues through the morning. The carcass is divided according to an ancient logic. These cuts for salting, these for smoking, these to be eaten fresh while they can be. The head is split to extract the brain, which will be used in the tanning of leather. The feet will be boiled for gelatin. The bones will be cracked for their marrow and then boiled for soup stock. I watch Agnes and the other women working with the intestines, the patient, meticulous task of cleaning them in cold water, scraping away the inner membranes, preparing them to hold the sausage meat. Their fingers are red with cold, wrinkled from the water, but they do not complain, do not slow. This is work that must be done, and done right, or meat will spoil, and the whole purpose of the slaughter will be defeated. We lose one pig in 3 to spoilage, Agnes tells me, her voice matter-of-fact. Some winters more, a bit of taint in the meat, bad salt, not cold enough for smoking, too warm for keeping, and then you've killed the pig for nothing, and your children go hungry. The weight of that statement settles on me. This is not simply food preparation. It is a gamble with survival itself. Every choice matters. How much salt to use, how long to smoke, where to store, how to portion. Get it wrong and people die. It is that simple, that stark. As the day wears on, I begin to understand the layers of decision-making involved. Some meat is being heavily salted and will be packed into barrels where it will keep for months, growing harder and saltier with time but remaining edible. Other pieces are being rubbed with salt and spices and will be hung in the smokehouse, where they will absorb the preservative smoke of green wood fires over the course of weeks. Still other portions, the offal, the head meat, bits of trim, are being made into immediate use foods, pies, stews, sausages that must be eaten within days. An older woman, watching over the process with the authority of long experience, explains the choices. "You must think ahead," she says. "What will we eat in January? In February when the stores run low? At Easter when we have been fasting?" Each piece has its purpose, its time. I notice that portions are being set aside, wrapped carefully and taken to other cottages. The pig belongs to one family, but its meat will be shared, some as gifts, some as exchanges for future favors, some as charity to those who have no pig to slaughter. This is survival as community practice, recognition that no family can endure alone. By late afternoon, the pig has been entirely transformed. What was a living animal this morning is now food in various forms, stored and prepared according to methods refined over centuries. The ground where it was slaughtered has been scraped clean, the blood-soaked earth turned over, every usable bit collected. That evening, there is a meal shared among those who helped with the butchering. Fresh pork roasted over the fire, liver fried with onions, blood pudding still warm from the pot. The portions are not large. Even in this moment of relative plenty, restraint is necessary. But the richness of the food, the flavor of fresh meat after weeks of dried and salted fare, creates a mood of celebration. We eat largely in silence, the food too precious to interrupt with unnecessary conversation. But I see the faces around the fire, see the satisfaction there, the relief. One more pig successfully butchered and preserved. One more small victory against winter's siege. As I lie down to sleep that night, full in a way I have not been since arriving here, I think about what I have witnessed. This was not simply butchering, it was an act of defiance against scarcity, against waste, against death itself. It was the transformation of mortality into sustenance, accomplished through knowledge and skill and communal labor. Tomorrow, the work of preservation will continue. The meat will be turned in its salt, the sausages hung to cure, the lard rendered and stored. But tonight, for one evening, the village has enough. And in winter, enough is a kind of miracle. January brings a subtle shift, imperceptible at first, but growing more definite with each passing day. The light lingers a few minutes longer each evening. The angle of the sun, though it provides little warmth, climbs fractionally higher in the southern sky. These are not things I notice consciously at first, but my body knows them, responding to signals older than thought. The cold has not lessened. If anything, January is colder than December was, the deep freeze that comes when winter settles into its full power. But there is a quality to it now that speaks of limits, of boundaries. Even winter cannot last forever, though the villagers are too wise to speak of this aloud, too respectful of the season's capacity for late cruelty. I have been here 6 weeks now, and I feel it is time to continue my journey. My coin is running low, and Marjorie, though she has never said so, needs the room for her own stores more than she needs my rent. More than this, though, I feel the pull of the road, the traveler's restlessness that will not let me settle even in comfort, let alone in the grinding routine of winter survival. When I tell Marjorie of my intention to leave, she nods as though she has been expecting it. "You'll want to go before the February snows," she says. "They can trap a man between villages and no one will come looking until spring." She is right, of course. I have seen how the village has pulled into itself, how contact with the outside world has dwindled to almost nothing. The last peddler came through in November. The last news from the market town arrived weeks ago. They are alone here until the thaw, and I must leave while leaving is still possible. I spend my final days making preparations and saying farewells that are wordless but understood. I help Edmund stack wood one last time, my hands moving in the rhythm I have learned here. I attend Mass and receive Father Benedict's blessing, his thin hand cool on my bowed head. I share a last meal with the families I have come to know, accepting bread and salt as gifts for the road. Agnes gives me a packet wrapped in cloth, the preserved sausage, hard as wood and twice as valuable. For when you're between villages, she says. And I know what this gift costs, what portion of her family's store she is giving away. I accept it with the gravity it deserves, a traveler's gratitude for a gift that might mean life itself if the road proves harder than expected. On the morning of my departure, the village wakes to a rare sight, a pale sun breaking through the perpetual gray, casting long shadows across the frost-silvered ground. It feels like an omen, though of what I cannot say. Marjorie feeds me a last breakfast of porridge and ale, her movements efficient as always, her face showing nothing. But when I rise to gather my few possessions, she turns away to tend the fire, and I sense emotion she will not display. We have lived in close quarters for weeks, shared fire and food and the intimacy of survival, and there is a bond in that, however temporary. The path out of the village leads past the church, and I pause there, looking back at the cluster of cottages, the thin threads of smoke rising into the cold air. From here, it looks almost peaceful, almost timeless, a scene that could be from any winter in the last 100 years, the last 1,000. Only by coming close, by living among them, have I learned what these simple buildings contain. Courage and calculation, fear and hope, the quiet heroism of simply persisting through another day. A few villagers are abroad despite the early hour and the cold. A man nods to me as he passes, carrying an axe toward the woodpile. A woman waves from her doorway, her breath clouding in the air. These small acknowledgments feel significant. Permission to leave, recognition that I was here. The road is hard beneath my feet, the frozen ruts making walking treacherous. I move slowly, carefully, finding my rhythm. Behind me, the church bell rings for prime, Father Benedict faithful to his duties regardless of who is there to hear. The sound follows me as I walk, growing fainter with each step, until finally it is lost beneath the crunch of my footsteps and the whisper of wind through bare branches. I crest a small rise and look back one final time. The village is smaller now, a collection of shapes and smoke, already becoming memory. I can see the church tower rising above the cottages, see the fields stretching away in shades of brown and gray, see the forest dark beyond. It looks fragile from here, impermanent, a small human mark on an indifferent landscape. But I know better now. I know the strength contained in those timber-framed walls, the knowledge preserved in those small cottages, the resilience of the people who wake each morning to face another day of cold and scarcity and isolation. They will endure this winter as they have endured winters before, as their children will endure winters after. The village will remain, long after I have forgotten the exact configuration of its lanes, the precise features of its inhabitants' faces. The road ahead is empty, stretching toward the next village, the next town, the next unknown. I pull my cloak tighter and begin walking in earnest, the cold air burning in my lungs, my shadow long on the frozen ground beside me. I think about what I am leaving behind, the smell of wood smoke and turnip stew, the sound of Marjorie's spinning wheel, the taste of hard bread shared by the fire, the faces of people I will never see again, whose names I will forget, even as I remember the lessons they taught me about survival, about community, about the quiet dignity of endurance. The sun climbs higher, though it provides more light than warmth. My path leads through fields where stubble pokes through patches of snow, past hedgerows bare and black against the pale sky. In the distance, I see the forest I must pass through, and beyond that, the unknown. But I carry with me something beyond memories. I carry the knowledge of how life persists in the face of winter's assault, how humans have learned to endure what seems unendurable, how communities bind themselves together against the cold. I carry the taste of fresh pork after weeks of dried food, the warmth of a shared fire, the sound of voices raised together in prayer. Most of all, I carry the understanding that winter, for all its harshness, is not merely an enemy to be defeated, but a teacher, a forge in which resilience is made, a crucible that burns away everything but what is essential. The villagers I have left behind understand this in their bones, in the way they move and work and live. They do not fight winter so much as flow with it, accepting its terms while refusing to surrender. As the village disappears behind me and the road stretches ahead, I feel both sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the warmth left behind, for the connections briefly made and now severed. Gratitude for the privilege of witnessing lives lived with such quiet courage, such practical wisdom. The road is long, and other villages wait ahead, each with its own stories, its own struggles, its own victories against winter's siege. But this village, these people, this particular winter, they will stay with me, a permanent chapter in the longer story of my wandering. I walk on, a solitary figure on a frozen road, carrying within me the warmth of fires shared and the knowledge that even in winter's depths, life finds a way to persist, to endure, to prepare for the spring that will, eventually, inevitably, come. There are moments, even now as I walk this frozen road, when I am struck by the profound strangeness of what I have witnessed. In that small village with its mud and timber cottages, its smoking fires and narrow lanes, people are living lives that their grandparents lived, that their grandchildren will live. The wheel turns, the seasons cycle, and winter comes again and again, each time demanding the same sacrifices, the same calculations, the same courage. What does it mean to survive a winter? Not merely to live through it, though that is challenge enough, but to survive it with something intact, hope perhaps, or dignity, or simple human warmth. The villagers I left behind this morning understand something I am only beginning to grasp. That survival is not a single dramatic act, but 1,000 small ones, repeated daily, hourly until the crisis has passed and spring returns. Every log split and stacked, every root preserved in straw, every precious portion of salt pork rationed carefully, every fire tended through the night, every child fed even when bellies are empty, every morning faced with the determination to see another evening. This is how winters are survived, not through heroism, but through the patient accumulation of small efforts, the refusal to surrender one day at a time. I think about Marjorie, spinning by her fire, her fingers creating thread from wool while the dark presses against the walls. I think about Agnes, her hands red with cold as she cleaned intestines in freezing water, preserving meat that might keep her family alive when February's hunger comes. I think about Edmund, whose hands shake until he grasps a knife to butcher a pig, muscle memory overriding age. I think about Father Benedict, ringing his bell in the gray dawn, maintaining order and routine when chaos and despair might otherwise prevail. These are not exceptional people. They would not think of themselves as brave, as strong, as remarkable in any way. They are simply doing what must be done, what has always been done, what will always be done as long as humans cluster together in small communities and face the world's indifference with nothing but their collective will to persist. And yet, is this not its own form of heroism? Not the heroism of songs and stories, not the glory of battles won or great deeds accomplished, but something quieter, deeper, more essential. The heroism of continuing when continuation is hard. The heroism of care, for children, for the elderly, for neighbors, for the future represented by carefully preserved seeds and young animals kept alive through winter's hardship. Winter teaches many lessons, but perhaps the most important is this. We survive together or we do not survive at all. No family can endure alone. No individual can hoard enough to see them through. The pig is shared. The fire's warmth is shared. The labor is shared. Even suffering is shared, made bearable by the knowledge that others suffer alongside, that when one family's stores run low, another might have a bit extra. That community is not merely a word, but a living practice of mutual care. I walk on through the frozen landscape and I carry these people with me, these faces and voices in moments of shared firelight. They do not know they have taught me anything. They were simply living their lives, doing what needed to be done. But I have learned from them nonetheless. I have learned that time is not a straight line but a wheel, returning always to the same seasons, the same challenges, the same essential human responses. I have learned that poverty of material need not mean poverty of spirit. that wealth can be measured in split wood and salted meat as surely as in gold. I have learned that faith is not always found in scripture or theology, but in the daily practice of hope, in the decision to bank the fire carefully each night because tomorrow will come and will need to be faced. Most of all, I have learned about the quiet dignity of endurance. No one will sing songs about these villagers. No chronicle will record their names or their deeds. When they die, they will be buried in the churchyard, marked perhaps by a simple stone or perhaps by nothing at all. And within a generation or two, they will be forgotten. Their individual stories will be lost. But the pattern continues. The knowledge passes from mother to daughter, father to son, how to preserve meat, how to bank a fire, how to ration food, how to care for the sick and comfort the dying, how to survive winter, one careful day at a time. This knowledge is their legacy, more durable than stone, more valuable than gold, the accumulated wisdom of generations who have faced winter and lived to see spring. As I walk this frozen road, I understand that I am not truly leaving them behind. They are in me now, part of my understanding of what it means to be human, to be alive in a world that is beautiful and harsh in equal measure. When I reach the next village, I will carry these lessons with me. When I face my own winters, and we all have our winters, literal or metaphorical, I will remember what I learned in those smoke-filled cottages. That survival is possible. That community matters. That spring always comes, even when it seems impossibly distant. That the human capacity for endurance, for care, for hope in the face of hardship is perhaps our greatest quality, more defining than our wars or our cathedrals or our kings. Winter in medieval England is not a season for the faint of heart. It is brutal, unforgiving, a test that some do not pass. But those who do pass it, those who survive to see another spring, carry with them knowledge that no book can teach, wisdom written not in words, but in the very cells of their being. And so I walk on, a traveler between worlds, carrying within me the warmth of fires that burn in a village I have left behind. Fires that will continue to burn through this winter, and the next, as long as there are people who understand that survival is both a practice and a promise, both a challenge and a gift. The road ahead is long, and other villages wait, other winters to witness, other lives to touch briefly before moving on. But I am changed by what I have seen, marked by it, made richer by it in ways that have nothing to do with coin. And if you have traveled with me through these words, if you have glimpsed something of what it means to survive a medieval winter in a small English village, then perhaps you too have been changed, marked, made richer. For these stories, of ordinary people facing extraordinary hardship with courage and grace, are our stories too, echoing across the centuries, reminding us of what we can endure, what we can become, when we face our winters together. If this journey moved you, don't forget to subscribe and join me on the next voyage through forgotten worlds.